Welcome back. Rose, human trafficking is a sad and horrible reality. It's gotten a lot of attention in the last decade or two, but human trafficking is nothing new. And the woman that we're introducing today, as a Christian, every Christian should know, was born over 150 years ago. And one of the things she's most known for is rescuing boys and girls from being trafficked and sold into prostitution in the Hindu temples, which is also known as being married to a god in Hinduism in India. Her name is Amy Carmichael. Amy Carmichael was born in Northern Ireland on December 16, 1867, to a moderately wealthy Presbyterian family in the coastal village of Mill Isle. She was the oldest of seven children born to David Carmichael, who was a miller, and his wife Catherine. Her parents were devout Christians who taught their children the faith. In her writings, Amy wrote about her mother talking to her about the Lord Jesus and singing hymns to her. And Amy came to faith in 1883 while she was away at a girls' boarding school in Yorkshire, England. Because of the changes in the flour industry, her father's mill began to lose money and it eventually shut down. Being overwhelmed with financial difficulties and struggling with a bout of pneumonia caused her father to pass away in 1885, and Amy was forced to return home from boarding school to help her mom raise the other children.
The Carmichael family eventually moved from Mill Isle to Belfast, Ireland. One morning on their way home from church, Amy and her brothers helped a poor elderly woman whose feet were wrapped in rags. They helped her get home. Amy was moved by compassion to help her, but she also didn't want her friends to see her with the beggar woman. And on the way, Amy noticed some words that were engraved on a nearby fountain. And she felt like God was speaking to her through those words, telling her she needed to change her values. In other words, her actions looked good, but her heart was in the wrong place. Now, whatever experience Amy Carmichael had that day, it caused her to start serving the poor and downtrodden, especially in the slums, with a society called the Belfast City Mission. Many of the people she served were local girls who worked in nearby mills in poor conditions. They usually worked 14 hours a day for very little money. The girls were known as shawlies because of the cheap shawls that they wore around their shoulders. Most young women wanted nothing to do with being around the shawlies. So Amy started a Bible study with them and started bringing them to church. Now, as you can imagine, just like happened with William and Catherine Booth, who we looked at a couple weeks ago, when Amy tried to bring these poor girls to church with her, they weren't welcomed by the normal, quote unquote, churchgoers. When the Bible study she started quickly grew to more than hundreds of young ladies, Amy prayed for a place to gather and the means to purchase it. God miraculously provided what would be today's equivalent of around 85,000 US dollars. And that enabled her to purchase a tin tabernacle she named the Welcome Hall. It's still there in Belfast today, but it's now known as the Welcome Evangelical Church.
In 1889, the Carmichaels were facing bankruptcy, so they moved from Belfast, Ireland to Manchester, England. Amy took up her work of serving God in the slums in that city too. During those early years of her life, her faith was deepened and strengthened, and she not only attended church, but she went to what were known as Christian conventions. In 1887, she was attending one of those conventions and she connected with a missionary named Robert Wilson. He was an elderly widow and he actually became a dear friend to her and a mentor. At one point, she became desperately ill and she was moved to the Lake District where he lived for a while to work for him. And while she was there, she recovered her strength. But also while she was there, she heard many stories about missions work. And it wasn't long, as you can imagine, until she was set on being a missionary herself. The first place that she hoped to go was China. So she packed her bags and she applied and she anticipated being sent, but they denied her because of her health. And Amy did have some problems. She suffered from neuralgia, which is something that gives you sharp nerve pain, and it was really debilitating, and sometimes it caused her to be bedridden for weeks at a time. So she couldn't go to China, but she wasn't going to give up. She applied again, and this time she applied to go to Japan. She was accepted to go there eventually, and she headed there in 1893.
But her missionary journey to Japan was disappointing. The Japanese language seemed impossible to her, and the missionary community was not how she pictured it would be. In addition to that, her health was still a problem. So, after 15 months as a missionary, Amy became convinced that Japan was not where God wanted her. So, she packed her bags and went to a British colony known as Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. She wasn't there long, though, because until she heard that Mr. Wilson had suffered a stroke. So, she packed her bags and headed back to England so she could care for him, and that was around the end of 1894. While she was helping him recover, Amy continued making plans for going back to the mission field. On October 11th, 1895, she left for India to work with the Church of England Ziana Missionary Society, and she would never return to England after that. Soon after her arrival, she contracted dengue fever, which laid her low for a period of time, but she did recuperate and then she began working there. She found herself serving in a land where the predominant religion was Hinduism, and many Christians were nominal, so they weren't really practicing Christians. And on top of that, the social structure was determined by a caste system in which the women and the poor suffered greatly. She wasn't in India long before she saw sati. That's the practice of burning a widow alive as a sign of loyalty to her dead husband.
I can't imagine being that age back in that time and,
Mm.
being, going into a world like that.
Look, I
But
love my husband, but if he dies first, I'm not burning myself to death.
no,
I mean,
that's
that
a
is just
sign of loyalty.
horrible.
It's
Horrible,
horrible.
horrible.
Yeah. False religions still have a lot of horrible practices.
Without a doubt.
So Amy noticed some other things about missionary life in India. She saw that the church was very active, but like you said, the lives of the Indian people were not really being changed much. She detested some of the things that she saw the missionaries themselves doing, noting that many missionary ladies were busy drinking tea and gossiping, showing very little concern for the eternal souls of the people that they were supposed to be witnessing to. Here are some lines of poetry that she actually wrote concerning the missionary community in Bangalore. Onward, Christian soldiers, sitting on the mats, nice and warm and cozy like little pussycats. Onward, Christian soldiers, oh, how brave we are. Don't we do our fighting very comfortably? So it shows you kind of how she feels.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
she
pretty
must have had a
funny.
sense of humor.
Yeah. Wonder if she told it to them.
I don't know.
Amy left Bangalore and went to the very south end of India to live with another missionary family, Thomas and Catherine Walker. The Walkers were a godly family that really understood the Hindu religion, and they knew the tremendous need of reaching out to them. For several years, Amy, along with the daughter of the Walkers and several Christian Indian ladies, began an itinerant ministry through the villages in the southern tip of India in the state of Tamil Nadu. They were dubbed the Starry Cluster because the Indians recognized the sincerity and light that shone forth from them. The members had no salary, but they looked to God to supply their needs. Their attitude was, how much can I do without that I may have more to give? It
That's a
was
great
it,
attitude.
it is a great attitude. It reminds me of the Booths, who were
Hmm.
very self-sacrificing.
Yep.
It was during this period of time that Amy took classes on the habit of wearing Indian dress and staining her skin with coffee to help her fit in. She continued wearing Indian dress throughout her lifetime. They preached that Christ Jesus had come into the world to save sinners and that it wasn't through religious rituals that a person was made and kept in right standing with God, but that a person comes to know God through trusting in Jesus' death on the cross that atoned for their sin, and that through his resurrection, they could also have a relationship with God for all eternity. The villagers frequently responded to the gospel with disinterest or rejection. It wasn't until 1898 that Amy saw two women become Christians. It's a long time without seeing the gospel hitting any fertile ground.
That's a long time, especially when you're living back, like that quote said, how much can I do without
Right.
so that I can serve the Lord? I mean, it's a long time. In the area where Amy lived and spread the gospel, there was a little girl named Preena, whose mother had been widowed. Preena's mother decided to give her to a Hindu temple where she would become a temple prostitute. And Hinduism encouraged the temple slavery of children. It was prostitution perpetrated in the name of their ancient religion, where little girls and boys were sold to quote unquote marry the Brahmin temple priests. And like I said, it was looked at as if they were being quote unquote married to the gods, the Hindu gods. Preena tried to escape and she was caught. Her punishment was to have her hands branded with a red hot poker. She tried to escape a second time, and this time she made it. And by God's grace, on March 7, 1901, Preena ended up meeting Amy. And not long after taking in Preena, four more girls came to Amy for refuge. Amy found an empty missionary house in the village of Dohnavur and set up a home for these kids. By June of 1904, Amy had 17 children under her care. And by the end of the year, she had 30 kids under her care. So Amy had no more time to spend as a traveling evangelist. What she needed to do, she knew, was to care for these children that God was bringing her, especially out of this Hindu sex slavery.
Yeah. Amy, who came to be known as Amma, started to see the horrible trafficking of not just girls, but boys too, all in the name of Hinduism, like you said, Chris, making it seem like some noble thing when it's really just sex slavery.
And
So,
they get sold. Like the mother of Preena was a widow and she needed money.
right. So, Amy started taking in boys too to save them from the horrible life of being a Hindu temple prostitute. The refuge she started began growing. With the help of the Walkers, Dohnavur grew and they built a school. The Walkers' help ended when Thomas died of cholera in 1912. Catherine died about a year later in England. And at this point, Amy was overseeing around 140 children and adults. The Lord continued to grow and bless the village. And by 1924, there were 30 nurseries. There was a compound for boys with about 70 to 80 children, and they even had 3 doctors. And the community is still there today. Dohnavur Fellowship is located on a large tract of land on the very southern tip of India with many tropical plants and flowering shrubs and trees. The central building is a large chapel where devotions are held daily. The children are housed in family units. Each house takes care of 8 to 10 children with a house mother living with them, and she supervises them. The boys and girls sections are separate by some distance. They have a hospital, schools, and other facilities for the children. The house Amy Carmichael lived in is still there too.
Yeah. And I've seen pictures of it because I was interested and looked it up. And it's really cool. It's gorgeous. I mean, like you said, tropical plants and trees, and it's amazing that one woman did all this. But when she did it, she faced opposition. It wasn't until 1956 when India pushed to begin legislation to stop the trafficking, and that was with a bill called the Suppression of Immoral Traffic in Women and Girls Act. And it wasn't until 1986 that that amendment was actually renamed to make it gender neutral and include the males. And, Rose, not to get sidetracked from Amy Carmichael's work, but in pockets of India, this human trafficking thing in the service of the Hindu religion still goes on. I read one example of girls they call Devadasis, and they're girls who are dedicated to an Indian goddess as a child, and then they're forced to sacrifice their virginity to an older man in exchange for money or gifts. And it happens after an elaborate and beautiful wedding ritual, which to the girl kind of seems like every girl's dream until they get to the bedroom. And then it's their worst nightmare. And many are under 10 years old when this happens. And promised into marriage, and then they're forbidden to marry anybody else. They're just forced into this sexual slavery to earn money by their family and, serving other men in prostitution, basically, in the name of serving the goddess.
Chris, CNN did a news report portraying this father. He said he was so poor he couldn't afford to feed his children, so he was going to have to sell two of his daughters into this. But they portrayed him as sympathetic, like, oh, this poor man. Totally missed. He was selling his girls into sex slavery, and they were, I think, 9 and 10 or 8 and 9. But they made him seem like the sympathetic one, like, oh, I have nothing else to do. And it was horrible. It was absolutely, that CNN was putting this evil up, making it seem like, oh, this poor guy has no
This
choice.
poor guy. Yeah, it's horrible. And you see pictures of it all over, like especially on X, you see Muslims and you see Hindus and they're, these kids dressed up in these, wedding garb, and it's horrible.
Yeah, there was a picture on X going around of a girl. She was 9 or 10 in this beautiful wedding gown, sitting next to a guy who was like 60, who was her husband.
Hmm.
It was
Yep.
awful. And many of these girls have sisters and brothers who marry, have children, and live a prosperous life. Probably some of it from the money they get from selling the one daughter.
Yeah.
It's believed by many in the family that their lives are blessed because the parents gave the Hindu gods one child into perpetual servitude. And I mean, that's just absolutely horrendous. But getting back to Amy Carmichael, eventually on October 24th, 1931, at the age of 63, Amy suffered a catastrophic injury. Around dusk, she was touring a construction site and fell into a hole that had been dug for a toilet in the wrong spot. Amy broke her leg, dislocated her ankle, and twisted her spine, and she never fully recovered from her injuries. From that point on, Amy spent all her time in her room with an occasional short walk to the garden outside her window. But that didn't stop her from doing the work that God called her to do. She continued to manage the staff and regularly met with children who needed help or needed discipline. By the 1940s, around 900 adults and children were at Donever, along with 40 to 50 helpers. And Amy oversaw all of them from her room. Instead of retiring from the mission field or wallowing in self pity, she said, and I quote, "You must never ask God why. To will what God wills brings peace." Now, just before the accident, she said she had prayed, and again I'm quoting, "Do anything, Lord, that will fit me to serve thee and help my beloveds." Now, she didn't
Amazing.
expect that service to take place within the four walls of her bedroom, or for her prayer to be answered by her falling into a hole and having that debilitating accident. Amy spent the last 20 years of her life confined to bed as an invalid. And she not only oversaw the community, she wrote 37 books and many poems about her relationship with God. She was quite the poet, as we saw.
She was, well, she was to the point. Let's say
Yeah,
that.
I'd be interested
Yeah.
to read her poems.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty amazing. As she grew older, Amy began to plan for her death, and she also started to plan what she hoped would happen at Dohnavur after she was gone. She argued that India must be reached by Indians. She believed wholeheartedly that if Christianity was to spread in India, evangelism had to be something that the people of India engaged in themselves. She felt that spreading the gospel could not be the sole job of Western missionaries. And I think she's probably absolutely right
Absolutely.
wherever you're talking about.
As we saw when we looked at in Nigeria, Christianity didn't take hold because it was Western Europeans coming in and evangelizing.
Yep. So what Amy did was she started appointing Indian women to the leadership positions at Dohnavur. I mean, she obviously felt the village needed to be run by Indian women, not foreign missions organizations. And in 1950, shortly before her death, she began transferring her own leadership away to these women. On December 16, 1950, Amy celebrated her 83rd birthday. Just over a month later, on January 18, 1951, she passed away. Amy asked to be buried in the garden outside her window, but she did not want a tombstone showing her name. She didn't want that glory for herself. The children did put up a stone bird bath with just the name Amma. And, we look at her life and we see Amy served the Lord in India for over 50 years, never returning to England. And one of the things that's most notable about her life is that whenever the Lord redirected her steps, she went with it. She wasn't striving to have her own will be what God did with her life. She wasn't striving for her own glory. He directed her steps and she willingly obeyed. And that's one of the reasons that Amy Carmichael is a Christian that every Christian should know.
Have a blessed day, everyone.